Hi guys, let's get started. Now, I usually like to start from the very beginning, from the very scratch, because I believe that when you start from the scratch and build up, your knowledge becomes complete. And so, in this application, we are going to be starting from the back end. When the word backend is mentioned, the first thing that comes to mind is the server. Now, what is the server? Generally speaking, the server is a piece of code or an hardware that manages request and response in a system. But there are different types of servers, there are different kinds of servers. And because we are dealing with a web server, I will want to modify that definition to say that a server is a piece of code that manages request and response between a client and the database. Now, it's very important that we define it like that because this definition will form the substructure upon which we are going to build our application. There are three things mentioned in that definition: the client, the server, and the database. For now, we are not going to be dealing with the client. We are going to be focusing on the server and the database. For our clients, though, we've said earlier that we are going to be making use of React JS as our UI and the client. For the server, our server is going to be running on Node.js and Express. And for the database, we are going to make use of MongoDB. Now, for our server, before we dive into the Express server, I would like us to look at the Node server. The reason for this is because there are so many things that there are several things that goes on under the hood when it comes to Express. Things that we are supposed to understand so that we have a bigger picture of what is actually happening. If you would, I have a folder open in VS Code which I have called the food basket. Now you can definitely make use of any other editor you are comfortable with. But for this project, we are going to use the VS Code. Now we'll come over here and open a file. I'm going to call it server.js. Now in Node.js, there's a module called the HTTP module. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Now we are going to bring in the HTTP protocol. We're going to do that by saying require, which is the syntax for bringing it in. We say require HTTP. And we're going to open the integrated terminal, which we're going to use in a bit. With this line of code, what we are trying to say is we want the node, we want Node to make available the HTTP module. And then as soon as Node makes the HTTP module available, we are going to save it in a variable that we are going to call HTTP. There you have it. Now, as soon as we have access to the module, that module actually contains a method called create server. And so we do HTTP because we want access to that method. We use the dot notation and we say HTTP dot create server like that. Now, at this point, we have access to that method that can create the server. And for us to make use of that method, we have to once again store it in a variable, which we are going to call server. There you have it. Now, at this point, it is safe to say that we now have the method of creating a server. But if you look at it, this server is doing nothing here. It's just lying around useless. Why? Because for a server to work, a server must be able to listen to requests. We said that a server manages requests and response. Now, before a server can respond, the server has to listen. But luckily for us, the method actually has a means of listening. The server actually can listen. And the syntax for that is simply server that listen. So we are saying, with this line of code, we are saying server listen. But the server is not human. The server does not have an ear. The server listens on a port. That's how the server gets to listen to requests. It listens on a port. And so we are going to offer it a port to listen to. And we're going to say 5,000, port 5,000. For us to have access to this 5,000 or to make use of this port, we have to save it also in a variable called port. Now, now, all we need to do is to give it the port that we want it to listen on. Now, if I were to say node server dot js, as you can see, it seems as if nothing is happening, but something is actually happening. Something that we are not privy to is actually happening, but we don't know what is happening. So, for us to actually know what's going on, we have to add a callback. A callback function is a function that is to be executed after another function has finished executing. It's like me telling T'Challa in Black Panther, as soon as you get to Wakanda, please give me a call. If I didn't get that call, I would imagine that maybe something actually happened or it didn't make it to Wakanda. And that is exactly what a callback does. A callback informs us about the first function, if it was successful or not. And so we can come here because this can actually take another function. I'm using the arrow syntax and do a console.log. I'm using the backticks and I will say server is listening on. Now I'm going to use the template literal. The template literal is I'll do a dollar, pair of curly braces, and the template literal actually gives us um, opportunity to insert variables, and I'll pick this variable called port and put it right here, port. And so if I go back, and do node server.js, there you have it. Server is listening on. Oh, I missed out something. I wanted to put a port here. I want to say server. I wanted to say server is listening on port 5,000. So let's see if that's what is gonna output. Node server.js. There you have it. Server is listening on port 5,000. But there's something still wrong with our server. Remember I said that the core function of the server is to manage request and response. But if we look closely at our server, I don't think it's doing that. It can listen, but it's not actually doing its main responsibility. And so we have to remind it of its responsibility. It has to man up, it has to server up. Just messing around. All right. So we'll come here, we put a function, and we bring in the requests and the response. An arrow function, I will do console dialog request. Now, the next thing I want us to do is to actually send a request. Let's see how the server will manage. Let's send a request, and to do this, we are going to be making use of the Postman. A Postman is an API tester. I know you guys have worked with Postman before, but for guys that have not used Postman before, it's a really cool way of testing your API. Now, I can come over here and open a new tab, and you can see there's different kinds of requests that you can make here. You have the get, the post, the patch, the delete, and so on. To make a request, you come over here and type the URL of the server. Now, let's say I want to make a request to Google. I can come here and say http or slash google.com. If I hit the send button, I get a response. Now I'm making a get request and I'm getting a response, an HTML file. And if you note the status quo says 200, 200 means that the request and the response circle has been completed and is successful. Now there's something I want to point out here. If you come to the header, you come and you see test content type test slash HTML. Now there are different types of content type. You can have test slash CSS, test slash plain, image slash PNG, image slash JPEG, and application slash JSON, which is what we are going to be working with mostly in this application. We are going to be returning JSON data. Now, let's say we want to make a request to our server. We come over here and we do localhost 5000. Remember, our port is 5000. And let's see if our server will actually listen on this port because we're about to send a request. Now, let's go back. Before we send this request, let's go back to our code and restart our server. Cool. Now, I'll go to Postman and hit the send. Now, if you come over here, you discover that we have a bunch of stuff, so many information coming out from the response. But if we come back to Postman, you realize that the request is unending because the response is not defined. But let's wait a little bit. Let's look at this. Let's take a look at this bit of info. The one I'm interested in actually is let me look for it. There's something I want us to see here. Let's look for it. Bum, 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 yes. Now over here you have the headers. You have the headers object, and in the headers object, it came with the response. You have the postman, the user agent is telling us the environment from which the request was made. In this case, it's postman. It can be any environment, but in this case, it's postman. The one I really want to see is okay. There's keep alive. The keep alive means we can have multiple HTTP requests and response. But the one I'm interested in is the URL and the method. Now, the URL and the method is very important in creating any API because different routes, different URL with different methods can do different stuff. Now, let's go back to our postman. How do we fix this? Now, to fix this, for us to send a correct, response, we can come over here and we can do we can take the response object and call an end. And so if we're to go back to Postman, before we go back, let's restart our server. Let's restart the server. Now, if we go back to Postman and resend our request, something just happened. Let's go to the body. As you can see, we get a 200 status code, which means that the request and the response cycle has been completed. It has been completed. We've managed to send a request and we've received a response. But what if we want to actually assess certain stuff that is coming from the response? Let's say we want to get the method that initiated the response. We can go and do request that method. If we go back to our postman and resend 200 status quo, and we come back here, there you have it. You have the get method. What if we want to get more stuff from the response? Let's say we want to get our headers, our URL, and our method. We can do a destructure ring and say headers, URL, and method. And we're going to pulling it out from the request object. And over here, we can console log headers, URL, and the method. Now let's see what happens. Let's restart our server as usual and go back to Postman and send 200 response. Come back to our code, and there you have it. You have the object, the header object here. This is the header object. Then you have the URL and you have the get method. Cool. Now, the next thing I want us to do is to actually send real data. Now, to do that, we can come over here and do res dot write. And I'm going to write Mufasa. Mufasa actually means lion. Sorry, Mufasa means king. It means king. That's right. Now, I'm going to get rid of all this. I'm going to get rid of all this. Now, if I go back to Postman, restart server, go back to Postman, and hit send, I have Mufasa. That's good. Now, let's go back to our code. Now, I want us to add the header. Now, the header that has the content type is very important when you are dealing with an HTML file, for instance, because the browser may not know how to render the file. But in our case, we are going to be working with application slash JSON, because if you go to Postman and we check the headers, you can see there's no content type here. And so let's add the content type. So we'll come over here and do res dot set header. and we have the key, which is content dash type, and we have our value, application slash JSON. So once again, if I restart the server and go back to Postman and send, and I go to the headers, as you can see, application slash JSON. But if I come over here and I do HTML, that's test slash HTML, and send, once again, restart the server, go to Postman and send. As you can see, I have test HTML. If I go to the body, I still have Mufasa. Now, the effect is not really felt at this point. Now, let's go back to our code. I want to change this to application.json, and now I want us to really send data. Want add coded. Want to add code data. It will eventually come from the database, but for now, I want us to add code data and see how it performs. Let's say const, the name of my data is food items. I will set it to an array of food. So here I have the ID 1, comma, I have the test, then I have cassava. Sorry, I have cassava. Cassava. I want to copy. I want to copy. Here I have 2, 3, and 4. I have cassava. I have beans. I can bean stack. I have vegetable, vegetables. It's vegetables. Yeah, I have onions, onions. Cool. One more thing. That's to be separated with a comma. Now, if I come over here and I say I set it up as an object, and I say I give it a success value, success value to be true, which means if it's successful, it should output true. If it's not successful, it should output false. Now, also, I want to return a data whose value will be the food items. There you have it, food items. And now, if I go over once again to Postman, restart the server, and go over to Postman and send, something is up here. So let's go back to, oh, The first argument must be of type string or an instance of buffer. Now, the reason why this is like this is because JSON has double quotes if it's key or value. What I mean is, if you go back to this place, which means this is not really JSON. This is actually a JavaScript object and it's not exactly JSON. Now, to resolve this, there is a method that we can use. We can come over here and say JSON dot stringify. Then we wrap the object up like this. Wrap the object like this, and there you have it. Now, if I go back to Postman, and if I come over here and hit the send button, there you have it. The stringify method enables us to convert from JavaScript objects to JSON. The last thing I want us to look at before we dive into Express is how to deal with data in the body of the request. Unlike the headers, sending requests in the body is not that straightforward when it comes to HTTP model. With requests, we can just do request that body that name or dot name or whatsoever we want to extract from the body of the request. But with our HTTP model, we have to listen to the request data and events because request and response are streams. Request is a readable stream while response is a writable stream. But the question is what are streams? Streams are one of the fundamental concepts that powers Node.js applications. They are basically data handling methods. So what are streams? To understand streams, I'll like to show us a slide that I put together to explain how it actually works. Now, let's say, for instance, John wants to watch a movie. Now, he opens up a browser and goes to a movie streaming website like YouTube. Now, it makes a search for a movie called Hotel Rwanda. Now, immediately, John hits the send button. His request drops inside the server. Now the server will now read the request into the memory. Now nothing happens until this is done. When it's read into memory, then the processing starts. Then John is able to watch the movie. But in the case of streams, you see what makes streams unique is that instead of a program reading a file into memory all at once, like in the traditional way we just saw, streams read chunks of data piece by piece. Now, what this means is that data are broken down into chunks. Now, for instance, let's say the same thing, the same narration. We have John makes a search and see what happens. Now, the first chunk is received and is read, and as it's been read, you can see that the response is already started. John is started watching the movie. It doesn't wait until everything is read into memory. It doesn't wait. Now, the second chunk comes up, the second part of the data of the request, and you see it's read into memory, but meanwhile, this is already happening. And so the third, let's take for instance, there's a third chunk of data here, and it's read, playback continues. So with this, John is able to watch uninterrupted play. Now, back in VS Code, I would like to represent what I just explained in code. Now, the first thing I want us to note is that readable streams emit data event once a listener is added. And then I can come and say request that and that and. Now with the requested and, I'm adding a listener, and immediately we add a listener to the request, data emits. So we say data. Now immediately the data emits, it's broken down into chunks. Now the way the system works is that as it's broken down into chunks, each chunk is acted on and processed, and much later the chunks are brought back together. Now, because of this, we're going to make use of an array. I'm going to call the array a body. So I'll declare an array and I'm calling it body. So what I want to do is that as the chunks keep coming, we gather it up in the body array. Now we'll say uh, chunk. Now I'm going to open up another function. I'm going to set another function here. In that function, I'm going to pass in the chunk, and I'll say chunk. I'm using arrow function. I'll say chunk. Now I'll now say body dot push. Push is an array method that allows us to add items to an array. So I'll now bring in the chunk. I'll bring in the chunk. I'll put chunk here. So what I'm saying here, let me start from the beginning and explain up to this point. I'm saying there's a request. Now I'm going to add a listener to this request. As soon as I add a listener to this request, data emits. Now, as the data emits is broken down into chunks. Now, as it's broken down into chunks, I want to gather up the chunk at a much later time and bring everything back together. And that's why I set up an array called the body. Now I'm making use of push, which is an array method of adding items to an array, and I'm passing in the chunk. Now, when I do this, I will now wait until this process ends. And therefore, the way HTTP model works is that I will have to listen to the end event. So I'll say request. I can say request that's on. But because I can also do this, I feel this is better. I can just chain everything and say that's on. I'm still referring to this request. So request that on. I'm going to listen to the end, and I am saying as soon as it ends, do this. As soon as it ends, do this. So as soon as this process here, as soon as all the process here ends, I want it to do something. I want it to I'll put a function, and I'll say as soon as this process ends, I want I want it to print out something. Now I will use a buffer dot concat body. So I'm saying I'm picking this array. I know this array contains the chunk of data. So I'm going to bring this array, I pass it inside here, the array called body, and concat, and add everything together. That's what this function does, this method does. It adds it together. So at this point, I want to add everything together. Now, this buffer, let's see what happens. Let's save this in uh, a variable called, um, let's call it body. So I'm saying body equals to buffer dot concat. Now, oh, I missed this. I'm supposed to declare this and say let's body. Yeah, this is how to do it. Let body equals to this empty array. And therefore, now if I go to postman and change this to post because we're going to be sending a request. And now, the way we do that is we'll come to the headers and add the content type. The content type we know is application slash JSON. And in the body, we can then add the request. And I'm going to say continent Africa. Now, if I hit the set button and go back to VS Code, nothing is happening because, oh, I did not console it. So I'll do console.log body, this body here. So I'm going to add body, go back to VS Code, sorry, go back to Postman. And if I hit the send button and come back, oh, I have to restart this. Postman, send, VS Code. There you have it. I have a buffer. Now, if you come back to this line of code, I added the buffer here because I know that what I will get is a buffer. But buffer is unreadable, as you can see. They're just one series of numbers. Now, I'm now going to, that's why I added the concat. And I'm saying the buffer dot the concat. Now, add everything together and make it meaningful, make it readable. Because if I leave it like this, it's not going to be readable. As you can see, it's not readable. I'm expecting continent Africa, and I got this. So to make it readable, I have to convert the buffer into string. And to do that, I'll just add dot to string function. Now, if I add this function, let's see, I restart the server, go back to Postman and resend the request. There you have it, continent Africa. And so I now have access to the request body. When we use Express, we are going to see how much easier things are. There are a couple of things though that I did not cover on the HTTP module. I don't want this video to be too long. My goal is to touch on few important stuff that I feel will help us better understand the next phase of this tutorial. Now, having looked at the node server, I would like us to begin to transit to the Express server. Before we can do that, we need to first address something, the restarting of the server anytime there's a change. It can really be frustrating, I tell you, having to start the server repeatedly. Now, to fix this, we are going to make use of NodeMon, Node Monitor. It basically watches the server and automatically restarts the server whenever it's necessary. Ooh, what a relief. All right. If you're brand new to Node and you haven't worked with Node before, basically we can install third-party module with something called npm, which is the Node Package Manager. And when you build applications that is going to have dependencies, you want to have a certain file called package.json. Again, I know a lot of you guys know the stuff. But for those who are brand new, package.json will hold a bunch of metadata, and it will also hold dependencies. It will list all the dependencies your app uses. Basically, all the packages your application depends on, will depend on. We can create it manually, but it's easier. We use a command called npm init that we can run. Now, let's see how that plays out. I'm going to clear this off. I'm going to clear this off. and do npm init. And then it starts asking us some questions. Package name, food basket is the default version, description. The entry point is server.js, server.js. Oh, it's actually the default actually. Now you have test command, git, keywords. After you can put your name here. Here I'm going to put Olami license, MIT. It's asking me if it's okay. I say yes. Now, the next thing I want us to do is to install our NodeMon. To install the NodeMon, I'm going to add a special flag which is dash uppercase D. I will do npm dash uppercase D, npm install dash uppercase D, then I'll do NodeMon. Now, this should install NodeMon. When the installation completes, it's going to create a node modules folder inside our directory here. Now, if we look at this, there's a ton of stuff in here, and the reason for that is because NodeMon has dependencies of its own, and those dependencies have dependencies. And so your node modules folder is going to have a lot of stuff in it, lots of packages, and your node module folder you don't want to push to GitHub when you are connected remotely. But we are making use of the local server, so I'm going to ignore that for now. So we are going to leave it the way it is. And if you check the package.json, let's check the package.json, you will see that our NodeMon is listed as a dev dependencies. Now, if you recall, I made use of dash D, that's dash uppercase D, while installing NodeMon. This is because NodeMon is only needed in our development environment. It's not something that we want in production. So in order to run NodeMon, we have to add an npm script. As you can see here, we have to add an npm script. So you can see the script section here, which doesn't really do anything. It just echoes something out. And the stats script run node server, which is what we initially ran to run our server. And so instead of having node here, we change it to NodeMon. So if we run npm, if we come down here and run npm start, there you have it. NodeMon is now working. Now, if I go back to our server and change something, let me change this, change something here. Instead of restarting the server, you can see that it has restarted on its own. I use NodeMon in just about every project I create. And so in the next video, we are going to be creating and testing all our endpoints for the food basket application. See you guys.